Hello, everybody. Happy Wednesday. I'm Stephanie Gillison, co-founder of Airdomo, and today we're talking about something that sits beneath almost every international property decision, but it's very rarely considered. It just isn't, right? Currency, tax, residency. Most buyers evaluate these separately, right? They think, is this a good price? What are the taxes here? Can I get residency? But in reality, these three factors are deeply interconnected. And we've got to decide those and evaluate those together. The country you choose determines your tax exposure. The currency determines your real returns. Residency determines how you can use, hold, and structure the asset. And when these aren't aligned, even a good property can be a complicated one. So today we're going to break it all down, and I am excited. Hannah is here, and she's going to guide us in this amazing conversation today. Hannah, how are you?
I'm very, very good. Thank you, Stephanie. I'm actually excited for this one. This is a very important topic and one that definitely hits home. It's one of the things that I considered when I moved to Dubai from Europe, the tax, the residency. So it's one of those topics where buyers often realize the importance after they've already committed. But because of each of these elements, it seems manageable on its own. But when they interact, that system can either support your strategy or it can very quietly work against it. So today is about understanding that system so buyers can make the decisions that are aligned and not accidental. So let's start at the foundation. Why are these three elements so interconnected?
Well, like you said, they all sit within that same decision where you buy. When you choose a country, you're not just choosing a location. You've got to choose a currency exposure, a tax system, and a legal and residency framework. For example, a country might offer attractive pricing, but it could have high capital gains. So if you're buying for rental income, that may not be a wise decision, right? It might be better to pay a little bit more for the price of the property and have less in capital gains. Another might offer residency, but then there's currency volatility, right? The money's just doing this all the time. So what's the point again? Another one might have low tax, but then limited resale demand. Maybe you could never sell the property again. So these aren't separate decisions. They're part of that same exact structure that you have to consider, just like you said, when you were looking to move to Dubai. You had to look at all of these things because not knowing, is that going to be your long-term plan, rather?
Exactly. So choosing that country is really, you're choosing a system. You're not just choosing that market. So that's why it's very important. But let's break it down, starting with the currency. Why is this often overlooked?
Well, because currency, it's always feels abstract at the beginning, right? Buyers are focused on the price, but not the conversion. Conversion's hard, okay? I'm going to be the first to go, "Oh gosh, what is this, what is this worth? What is this in euros?" It's difficult, okay? But currency affects your entry cost, your rental income if applicable, if you're going to buy it for rental, your exit value, and importantly, your real return when you convert it back to your home currency. If your base currency strengthens, your returns can shrink, right? So if it weakens, your returns can increase. So every international property purchase is also a currency position. And if you watched our webinar about how the wealth get wealthier building international portfolios, that was one of the highlights that we spoke about, was the currency conversion and how they manipulate that in order to build upon that.
And most buyers don't even realize that they're taking the position. It just happens automatically and they kind of forget about it. So let's talk about tax. How does tax interact with the decision?
Well, tax is going to determine how much of your return you actually are going to keep, right? I mean, here in the States, I hate taxes. Tax day's coming up here soon. And, but tax determines how much you're actually going to keep. So that's going to include property taxes, rental income tax, if that's, something that you're going to be doing with this property. Again, capital gains tax, inheritance rules. You got to think about this for the, if this is going to be that legacy property that you're going to leave to the heirs. And then potential double taxation depending on your home country. right? You don't want to pay double the taxes if your home country is also going to tax it. And so, two identical properties in different countries can produce completely different net outcomes. And that's purely because of tax. So, when currency and tax combine, the effect compounds. And that's why it that is it's almost it's a math equation and it's scientific, and we are set up to help you with all of that so that you don't have to get the extreme migraine that I'm getting right now even trying to think about it.
Yeah, it's about what survives after the system takes its share. So that's
Yes.
kind of how we think about it. But then we have residency, which is a very important one for a lot of our buyers. Where does that fit into the picture?
Well, that the residency determines how you can actually use the property and structure your life around it, right? It can affect how long you can stay. There might be a limitation on how long you can go and actually live in that property each and every year, right? Your tax residency status, what you're taxed when you are staying in that property, your access to services. There's some countries that have free healthcare, but will you have access to those services? And then your long term mobility. In some cases, residency can influence tax exposure as well. So it's not just a benefit, it can completely reshape the entire structure of ownership. And so that's why the residency is so important. And we've got to talk about there is so many areas where if you aren't a resident, then there's properties that could be off limit. So if something doesn't qualify, then you may not be able to become part of that community.
And that's exactly where this becomes bigger than just owning the property. It becomes an actual life decision that we need to consider very carefully. Now, what happens when buyers don't align all three elements?
Well, that's where the all the friction is going to happen because for example, a buyer earns in US dollars, okay? Buys in a volatile currency and sees returns fluctuate unexpectedly. And then another buyer focuses on residency but completely overlooks tax implications. Another one prioritizes price but ends up in a market with limited exit liquidity. None of these decisions are wrong individually, but when they don't align, the result is complex and sometimes regret's going to set in for sure.
Exactly. And I think 99% of the time, the issue is not the property, it's the lack of that alignment around it,
That's
which
right.
is what we help our buyers with. So let's talk about how sophisticated buyers think. Do they approach this differently?
Well, they do. They think in terms of alignment and structures, right? They ask, does this currency exposure make sense for my portfolio? Is the tax system compatible with my situation? Does residency add flexibility or complexity? Do these three elements work together or are they working against one another? They don't just try to optimize one variable at the expense of the others. They build a coherent system. And that's what you've got to be thinking about is that coherent system.
That's exactly what creates the clarity. So when everything is working in the same direction. So to kind of put all of this together, simplify it, and make sure that our audience understands what framework can they use.
Well, so I would suggest these three questions, and this is what is the most important here: is does the currency exposure align with your financial base? Okay. Two, does the tax structure support your long-term returns? And three, does residency increase your options, or is it adding constraints to your plan? So if the answer to all three is positive, then your structure is strong. But if one is misaligned, then it's worth reassessing all of it before committing. And that's why this is such an important investigation process and not just does it have a pretty view and is it priced right?
Exactly. So this is what really highlights is that global property is not just about choosing the right place; it's about building the right structure around it. So I do want to say for everyone watching, if you are exploring international property and want to understand the currency and tax and residency and how they come together for your specific situation, that's exactly what we help with. I do want to say if you don't know where to start, just go to airdomo.com. Scroll down on the homepage, you'll find Domo Match. And Domo Match is a quiz that's going to talk to you about what your lifestyle is, what you want, what you're actually looking for in a way that fits into your current life or what you want your life to be. And it will give you a couple of recommendations. And then with those recommendations, you can go on and book a complimentary call with us where we'll help you align a lot of those elements into a strategy that works for you and that connects these three elements that we just talked about that are so, so important. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.